Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a researcher accidentally roots the Red Hat update infrastructure on Azure, plus newly discovered flaws that are being actively exploited in the wild on some common routers right now, and then hacking Windows 10 by holding down the Shift key. Plus your great questions, our answers, a packed roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 295 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode on December 1st, 2016. This episode's brought to you by our three fine sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and iXsystems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream and all the downloads over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Yeah, it's powered by Scale Engine. Go check them out at scaleengine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hello, Alan.
Hello. One of these weeks you're just going to say the tech, the admin, and the t-shirt.
The t-shirt? I think that would be good, because you do kind of have like a thing going with the t-shirts right now. Yeah, I like that one, too. A 2013 Mint edition, it looks like.
Yep.
Nice.
From the Developer Summit in Malta.
Boy, you know, that's really what you take away from these trips over the years. It's just a bunch of shirts. A bunch of shirts and the occasional cold and some memories. Well, we have much...
Nobody got a cold in Malta. It was like 28 degrees Celsius every day and sunny.
Honestly, I feel like we all did pretty good at Meet BSD, too. I didn't get anything, and nobody in our crew got anything. You were good. Yeah, you know what? I think it's all about washing the hands. It's really about washing the hands and don't touch your face in between washing the hands. That's Chris's pro tips for going to events. Microsoft could have used some pro tips when setting up the Red Hat update services for Azure. You want to start there?
Yeah.
This is an interesting story. Tell me all about it.
Well, this one amused me because I've known the researcher that did this since he was a little kid just goofing off on IRC.
No. That's awesome.
Yeah, so researcher Ian Duffy accidentally rooted all of Microsoft's Azure Red Hat update infrastructure servers. So he starts with, I was tasked with creating a machine image of Red Hat Enterprise Linux that was compliant with the Security Technical Implementation Guide defined by the U.S. Department of Defense.
Oh.
This machine image was to be used on both AWS, Amazon's cloud thing, and Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud thing, both of which offer marketplace images which have a metered billing pricing model, meaning that instead of having to pay for licenses for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the fee is just included in the per-hour fee for the virtual machine. So, but if you create your own image, it's not going to be set up that way, right? And you're going to have to provide your own license.
Sure.
So he says, ideally, I wanted my custom image to be built under the same mechanism. As such, the virtual machines would be able to consume the software updates from the local Red Hat Enterprise Linux repository owned and operated by each of the respective cloud providers. So he goes about doing that, and he says both Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure utilize a deployment of Red Hat update infrastructure for supplying that functionality.
Yeah, on their own network.
Yeah, they have Red Hat update appliances installed on their network that allow all the virtual machines to get the updates and download them from inside the cloud.
That's just got to save a ton of bandwidth.
Yeah, and also I think the only way they can do the rent the license by the hour type thing.
Oh, okay.
So there's only one Red Hat update appliance per Red Hat update infrastructure installation. However, at Amazon and Azure and so on, they have one for each region so that the regions don't share anything so that they're not going to go down or whatever. This is both AWS and Azure use SSL certificates for authentication against the repositories. However, these are the same SSL certificates for every instance. Because you're cloning an existing image, they have one SSL private key that they put in every one of these instances. So all of them can prove that they have the key, but they all have the same key, and anybody else could steal that key. So that's slightly problematic. But on Amazon AWS, using the SSL certificate is not enough. You must have booted your instance from an AMI that has an associated billing code. It's this billing code that ensures that you paid the extra premium to be running Red Hat Enterprise Linux. On Azure, it remains undetermined how they manage to actually track the billing. to tell which instances have to pay and which ones don't. At the time of research, it was possible to copy the SSL certificate from one instance to another and successfully authenticate. Additionally, if you duplicate a Red Hat Enterprise Linux virtual disk and create a new instance from all the billing association seems to be lost, but repository access is still available. Possibly meaning that you can get Red Hat Enterprise Linux for free on Amazon Azure, or sorry,
Microsoft's, yeah.
Anyway, on Amazon, to set up repository connectivity, they provide an RPM with the necessary configuration. The installation script it references comes from an archive, which includes in the website there. If you expand this archive, you'll find the client configuration for each of the different regions. So you can see the server names are like, West Europe or West Europe dash RHUA.
East US to South Central US. Yep.
The post then goes on how he figured out all the different host names and so on, including looking at the build host for the RPM and so on. He says the build host is interesting. You also find this RHUI, so Red Hat Update Infrastructure -monitor.cloudapp.net, which by doing a port scan, he figured out is listening on port 8080 with a little web interface. So despite that application requiring a username and password, which he obviously didn't have, to get access to it, it was possible to execute its backend log collector via the API on a specified content delivery server. When the collector service completed, the application supplied URLs to archives which contain the logs and configuration files from that server. So even though the web UI is supposed to require a username and password, there's some endpoints you can get to that will trigger stuff and it won't ask you to log in. Right? And when you do it that way, you can get this collection of log files. But instead of just log files, it also includes all the configuration files from Microsoft's side of the setup of the servers.
Oh, that's a bit of a thing.
Yeah, and so you can see there's conf and conf.d, and you can see there's their Apache and various other things. What really gets you, though, are those two highlighted ones there under pulp.
ca.crt and ca.key.
Yes. So included in these archives are the SSL certificates that would grant full administrative access to the Red Hat Update appliances.
Oh, man.
So these certificates, anything signed by these certificates is allowed to log in to basically prove that it's the administrator. So now the researcher could access each of these different update appliances with full administrative access, and they could create a new package on there and distribute it to all the machines. Or better yet, they could create a newer version of some common package that maybe exists on every single machine. And in that package also include a backdoor. Now, every Red Hat Enterprise Linux VM at the cloud provider is now going to be like, oh, look, an important update. Let me download that and install it for you.
Right.
On every single Red Hat VM in the Microsoft cloud.
Wow, that's so nice and automatic and handy for them.
Rooted every every Red Hat box at Microsoft's cloud.
Yeah.
So he goes on to say there's actually in the repo that it installs that pulls the stuff from that repo, they have the GPG check disabled to avoid that pop-up message where you have to accept the key.
Yeah, that's annoying. It's frustrating.
Yeah. Well, that's what the point of that is, also to stop unsigned packages from being able to be installed. However, in this case, I imagine that config thing, if it was set up for GPG, would have included the GPG key anyway. So it wouldn't have helped.
Yeah, you're
but,
probably right.
Maybe it's something they should look at. Anyway, he reported the issue to Microsoft in accordance with the Microsoft Online Services bug bounty terms. Microsoft agreed it was a vulnerability in their systems, and they took immediate action to prevent public access to that RHUI monitor. Additionally, they eventually prevented public access to the Red Hat Update appliances, and they claim they've swapped out all the secret keys and so on, so that if anybody other than him also got copies of those keys, they wouldn't still have access.
They really also have no idea, perhaps, if anyone ever took advantage of this flaw. For all they know, somebody might be having some sort of heyday. Some agency may have got in there. I mean, I'm just saying, they don't really know. In fact, I think that's addressed in one of the articles I read about this. Sort of maybe also a little bit of reminds us Azure is still also kind of a new platform, and some of these things are still getting worked out.
Well, it's like most of the same flaws exist at Amazon, except for Amazon takes one extra step to make sure that they're getting paid for the license, because they're probably paying Red Hat for the license.
But they may we don't know if they're checking signatures, right? Do we know about that for Amazon?
No.
Yeah.
And
We don't.
it seems like it's possible that if he figured out the host name and Amazon wasn't blocking access to the update monitor, that he would have been able to do the same thing.
Wow, Alan, that was a huge hole. And do you know if he's going to get? They should write him.
He did it under the bug bounty, so I'm sure he would have got a bug bounty.
That's kind of a huge deal. And what I love about it, really, is it's something that a system administrator could figure out. Like he didn't really have to develop like 0-day exploit code or something like that. That's sort of compelling about this flaw.
He only was looking at it because he was trying to figure out how to make his own custom image that would get billed the same way as the stock images, and accidentally figured out it's like, oh, why is it sending me its SSL private key? That's not supposed to happen.
That also really intrigues me about this kind of story, because it's one of the things where really most of us that have worked in this field, if we were clever enough to catch this and inquisitive enough to follow it and smart enough to use the bug bounty program, we could do this. And so that's what's so cool about Ian doing this is...
Yeah, in this case, it didn't require any special skills. Almost anybody who watches the show could have done this if they had just been looking into it at that level for, some innocent reason like he was, and accidentally stumbled on.
Yeah, and he did a great job. So thumbs up to him, and his write-up's great too. We'll have a link to it.
Somebody else could have just as easily downloaded that config archive and not noticed that one of the things was a key that would let you do something.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Probably people have. Mm-hmm. Well, good job. And that's an interesting story. I did catch it. I mentioned the story on Linux Unplugged, but I didn't know the background with Ian and all of that. So that's really cool. All right.
He's been on IRC since... I've known him on IRC for many, many years.
It must have made you smile when you saw this story come out. Did you know ahead of time? Did you?
Well, no, I knew because I follow him on Twitter and I saw him tweet about it.
Well, all right. Let me take a moment and thank our first sponsor this week, and that is the great folks at Ting. TechSNAP.ting.com is the page you go to support the show and get yourself $25 off a Ting phone or device. Or, this is even better, because if you're going to bring a device, then you just get $25 in service credits, and that's probably going to pay for more than your first month. And that feels amazing. It did for me. When I switched to Ting in my first month, I didn't even pay for it. This is back in the day. I brought an Evo 4G. Now, Ting now has GSM and CDMA networks, so check their BYOD page, because the options are wider than ever. They just take your minutes, your messages, and your megabytes, and they add them all up. Whatever you've used, that's what you pay. It's $6 a month for the line. Every new line's just $6. No contract, no early termination fee. And what I love about pay for what you use is our audience is easily savvy enough to download your music to your phone, download your podcast while you're on Wi-Fi. Don't back up or sync unless you have Wi-Fi turned on for things like Dropbox. And now Netflix is helping you out, because it looks like they're adding the option to smartphones and tablets for downloads of Netflix shows. Now, it can't be their entire library, I'm sure, because of licensing issues, but Ting's got a write-up, so go to TechSNAP.ting.com and read more about it. They're really following this stuff closely. They also have a write-up about the new DirecTV service offering on their blog. I think this could be huge, and I really would love to see Netflix even added to the Android TV version, because, when I'm on a MiFi, I want to be able to, when I'm traveling, I would love to be able to download these before I leave, and then I'll just use the MiFi for my general browsing. That's what I love about Ting, is when I am on the road, I just use the data for a little bit. I'm a little bit heavier of a data user, and then most of the year, I hardly pay anything for data. It's such a great option. I save so much money by switching to Ting, and you can find out too. Use their savings calculator. Click on what would you save, go in there, click that son of a gun, put your data in there. Just put your numbers in there. Put all of it's just once your minutes, your messages, your megabytes, all that kind of stuff. And it'll run the calculation and see how much you would save. TechSNAP.ting.com. TechSNAP.ting.com. And a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Alan, so our next story sounds like it's something that's going on in the wild right now. Tell me what's happening, sir.
Yeah, so this is a newly discovered router flaw being hammered in the wild. And what's interesting is that basically they found another device that they could adapt the Mirai. Fuck. Somebody just told me how to pronounce it. And now I forget.
What is it? Oh yeah, no, it's not Maria, right?
Right, it's Mirai or something like that.
Mirai. Okay. You're talking about the botnet that takes advantage of all the little shitty devices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kept calling it Mariah, and it's.
Should we see? I could ask Google how to pronounce it. Do you think Google would know?
I don't know. Anyway,
Sharon will tell us in a minute.
We've been talking. Anyway, online criminals, at least some of them, wielding the notorious Mirai.
Let's just call it Mariah Carey. I don't know.
Mariah. Anyway, malware have transformed Internet of Things device into powerful denial of service cannons, have begun exploiting a critical flaw that's present in millions of home routers.
Mirai.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks, RJ.
That's not at all how English works, but anyway. Mirai. Anyway, routers provided by German and Irish ISP customers for Deutsche Telekom and Eircom, respectively, have been identified as being vulnerable, according to recently published reports from researchers who are tracking the attacks. The attacks exploit a weakness found in routers made by Zyxel, Speedport, and possibly other manufacturers. The devices leave TCP port 7547 open to outside connections from the internet. The exploits use the opening to send commands based on the TR069 and related TR064 protocols, which ISPs use to remotely manage large fleets of routers. According to this advisory published Monday morning by the SANS Internet Storm Center, honeypot servers posing as vulnerable routers are receiving exploits every 5 or 10 minutes. So there's this protocol, these two protocols called TR069 and 064, and basically it allows the ISP to send this like SOAP XML file to the router saying, hey, change your configuration to match this, right?
Okay.
So there's like one for changing the NTP servers to where you sync your time to, one for the DNS, and a couple other ones like that, right?
Okay.
And there's a flaw in the way it processes this SOAP where if you stick certain special shell characters and so on in the SOAP, it'll end up running commands on the router instead. So the SANS Dean of Research, Johannes Ulrich, said on Mondays that the exploits are most certainly the cause behind an outage that hit Deutsche Telekom customers over the weekend. In a Facebook update, officials for the German ISP said 900,000 customers were vulnerable to attack until they had rebooted their modem to get rid of the infection they had and then received an emergency patch from the ISP. Earlier this month, researchers at security firm Bad Cyber reported that the same 1-2 port combination of exploit hit the home router of some of their readers in Poland. So it's not just in Germany and Ireland. So Shodan search engine, which we know can connect, it scans different ports and basically makes searchable for banner strings and so on. The Shodan search engine shows that there are 41 million devices that have port 7547 open.
Oh.
And at least 5 million of those expose the service TR064 to the outside world. So if we thought the Mirai botnet was bad when it was like 25,000 or 100,000 or 400,000 devices, imagine 4 or 5 million cable modems on, fast German cable modems. They say the attack started shortly after researchers published attack code that exploits the exposed TR064 service, included as a module in the Metasploit exploitation framework. The attack code ends up opening port 80 web interface to enable remote administration. So they used the system the ISPs use to update the config on the routers and exploit a loophole in it to execute commands to open up the regular port 80 web administration interface to the internet, where then they can start guessing the default username and password, which is usually just like admin or whatever.
Yeah.
From there, the devices use default or otherwise weak authentication and can be remotely commandeered and made to join botnets that carry out internet crippling denial of service attacks, or as we saw,
or whatever you want.
You can use them to bounce your own connections off of them so that, when I'm stealing credit cards, it looks like you're doing it or whatever. To infect as many routers as possible, the exploits deliver 3 different exploit files. They actually basically have a different version of the exploit for each different hardware platform. They have one for big endian MIPS, one for different kind of MIPS.
Oh, sure. I guess they'd have to, wouldn't they?
Yeah. So they actually have one for two different kinds of MIPS and one for ARM. So no matter what kind of device your modem is, they're going to try to exploit it.
they got code for you.
Yep. Just like the Metasploit, the malicious payloads use the exploit to open the remote administration interface and attempt to log in using 3 different default passwords. The attackers then go and close port 7547 to prevent other criminal enterprises from taking control of the device. Or
it's their property now.
Yeah, so it's like now it's my modem. The other thing is that also stops the ISP from being able to use that interface to issue the updates.
Sure. Well, you wouldn't want things patched.
Yeah. The malware itself is really friendly in that it closes the vulnerability once the router is infected. It performs the following 2 commands. It injects busybox IP tables, it adds an input rule for TCP port 7547 and drop, and it also does kill all -9 telnet D. So it disables telnet and blocks the TR064 port. Which should make the device secure until the next reboot. The first, because it closes that port so no one else can infect it after.
Right. So essentially, it's fixed.
It's hard for the ISP to fix it.
Yeah.
After a reboot, the machine, the router goes back to normal until somebody goes and replaces the firmware. Once they've opened up the web interface so they can go into the machine, most of the time the web interface has a way to let you overwrite the firmware with new firmware. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I did this on purpose with the TP-Link routers we had.
Right.
Log into the Linux web interface and give it a new firmware, and it overwrites Linux with FreeBSD, and now it's a FreeBSD router.
Yep.
Well, somebody could easily download the firmware off of one of these devices, modify it a little bit so that it's got the extra stuff they need to attack or whatever, and lock it down and update that firmware. And then, they could break the firmware update mechanism such that the only way to ever be able to fix the device is to throw it away and get a different one. But yeah, it's quite interesting to look at how they did it. Mm-hmm. So while exploited routers will stop being vulnerable to other attackers, that's, the person who infected it first still has...
They own it.
Mm-hmm. So, maybe if the white hats get out there and disable all this first, but, it's up to the ISPs to fix it properly. In that particular regard, the ISPs could block inbound connections to port
I was just going to say
7547 on their network.
So the ISPs could solve this problem by just simply not allowing this traffic across their network. They do this for tons of protocols already. They block tons of ports. I mean,
most ISPs only block mail outbound.
Right. Well, also it's becoming, at least here in the States, it's super common now. They block all the Samba, the SMB, CIF stuff. All that gets blocked now. Yeah. So it seems like they do it. They'll do it on some occasions, at least. So really, that would be it.
At least as a temporary thing, it seems like they could do that. Although they also maybe need to make sure that one infected machine inside their network isn't infecting all the other machines, because in particular, when it's the ISP supplied router, unlike with those Chinese webcams or security cameras, if the attack vector for this one is all the people on the same ISP, you can scan a fixed net block, right? What the Mirai normally does is uses a randomization function so that it scans IPs all out of order, so that it doesn't look like it's doing a scan, right? Because it's scanning the whole internet, so it can have lots of time between ever hitting 2 sequential IP addresses. But if you found one infected modem at an ISP, and it's mostly an ISP provided modem, why wouldn't you try to just scan that entire IP range, the whole /19 or something, and probably find you have the most target rich environment there?
So most ISPs just blocked inbound 7547.
Well, the ones that ship these exploitable routers really need to do it, but yeah.
That seems like the people that should do it, though. That seems like a pretty easy fix. Interesting story.
If you look at the actual link to the exploit database, you can see that basically all it's doing is making the SOAP template that updates the NTP servers, and instead of the name of an NTP server, it just has backticks and a shell command to execute, and then boom, you own the machine.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, that exploit code is linked in the show notes if you guys want to check it out.
Yep. And there's lots of detail in the Ars Technica article. But yeah, it's just interesting that they go in and they run one firewall command to drop the rule that blocks the internet from accessing port 80 on the router. And then once they take over, they add a rule blocking access to the exploit vector, but leaving access to port 80.
Love that. I think it's brilliant.
Yep. And then they just change the passwords and lock it down, and now it's their modem, not yours.
Until you reboot it, and then they take it over again. Well, Alan, you know what else is brilliant? That's our next sponsor. That's DigitalOcean. Go build yourself a system over at DigitalOcean.com and use our promo code SNAPOcean. It's one word. You apply it to your account after you've created it, and you get a $10 credit. DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up really fast systems. Really nice, all backed by SSDs. They've got distros including Ubuntu, Debian, CoreOS, CentOS. They also have FreeBSD, and they just recently rolled out Fedora 25, if you want to try something with Fedora 25. And they got data centers in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, and Germany. I love their interface, though. That's really their hallmark feature, and they just have iterated so brilliantly over the years on the API and the interface. In fact, this API is so slick. If you ever wanted to just play around, this could be a really great opportunity. There's a guide that shows you how to install and use the DigitalOcean agent for additional graphs for your droplets. Who doesn't love themselves some graphs and data? And they got a great tutorial on that. They've also got tutorials on setting up all kinds of applications and services on Linux and FreeBSD. They also offer entire stacks of servers ready to go with all the applications loaded. They got the package signed from the upstream repos. They really do a good job. I actually was always really adamantly against using any of their pre-configured systems just as a matter of principle until I started wanting to experiment with a bunch of different open source projects, and now it's a go-to way for me to I don't want to mess with setting up Docker. If I want to try out something in a Docker container for 15 minutes, I go deploy it on DigitalOcean. It's super fast. You can deploy in seconds. They have really reasonable pricing. 3 cents an hour will get me 2 gigs of RAM, a 2-core processor, 40 gigabyte SSD, and 3 terabytes of transfer. DigitalOcean.com. Just use our promo code SNAPOcean. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. DigitalOcean.com. Use the promo code SNAPOcean after you create your account to get a $10 credit. Last week, we gave Ubuntu a lot of grief for being able to bypass the encryption by holding down enter 5 times or whatever it was for the disk encryption. And now this week...
Well, it didn't actually bypass the encryption, though. All it
bypassed
did was give you a shell.
Right.
But you still didn't have access to the encrypted data. So that was the important thing.
Now, is this a little different this week? So now we got a Windows 10 story that smacks of familiarness.
Yes, except it's much, much worse.
Okay.
The headline here is that every Windows 10 in-place upgrade is a severe security risk. So during the update process, with what Windows calls the feature updates, which is basically an actual upgrade to a newer version, although it's basically they're doing these minor versions of Windows 10 instead of service packs, kind of. And they're doing them more frequently, so it's kind of a new thing. But anyway, the way they do it is they actually boot into a Windows PE kind of working environment so that they can not be using the disk, and then update your operating system, right? So they're updating the operating system in place by booting into Windows PE and then doing a bunch of stuff to apply the update.
Wow, that's complex, but okay, makes sense.
Well, it's doing it that way so that you're not actually...
Sure, you're not using the files you're updating.
To be running Windows. Yeah, so even the normal way you install Windows updates, it just happens early on in Windows before Windows has started everything. This one's actually running out of a separate operating system, the Windows pre-install or pre-execution environment. Anyway, it turns out that during that update process, if you just hold down that Shift+F10, it will pop a command prompt running as system, which is the highest privilege level possible on Windows.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
What makes it worse is this happens after the volume encryption keys have been loaded.
Oh.
So if you have a BitKeeper encrypted disk, it's decrypted at this point. And so I have access to all of your files.
Yikes.
Even though they're encrypted.
That's not how it's supposed to work.
No. So yes, this is a big issue and has been there for a long time. The research says about a month ago, I finally got verification from the Microsoft product groups. Not only do they know about this, but they have begun working on a fix. He says, as I want to be known as a white hat, I had to wait until that had happened before I could blog about it. But it says, there is a small but crazy bug in the way that the feature update, previously known as upgrade, is installed. The installation is a new tool and is done by re-imaging the machine with the image installed by a small version of Windows called Windows PE, or pre-installation environment. This is a feature for troubleshooting that allows the user to press Shift+F10 to get a command prompt. This sadly allows for access to the hard drive during an update, but so Microsoft has disabled BitLocker at that point, and he has a demonstration video there as well. He says the real issue here is that the elevation of privilege that takes a non-admin to system, so root on Windows, even if it's BitLocker encrypted. And of course, it doesn't require any external hardware or additional software. So if, say, you work at an office and you have only regular user access to your machine, wait till the next time it does the Windows update thing, and then Shift F10, and then my user is now administrator. And now I have administrator on my machine. That would have been very handy at the college, where I didn't have administrator over the machine in my office, right?
No kidding, right?
But, you could also say, I walk away from my desk and go to the bathroom or whatever because Windows is doing an update and it's going to be a little while. Next guy over, he can just walk over to my machine, Shift F10, and do whatever he wants to my machine.
This is, I'm watching the video right now. It's kind of slow, but it's fascinating to watch him go.
Yeah.
Huh. Totally possible.
So there are a couple of ways to work around this as well. So in an email conversation with Bleeping Computer, the researcher reveals that because of certain defaults in Windows 10's configurations, computers might be forced to perform an update even if the user is not present or hasn't logged in for a long period of time. At some point, every computer that is not managed by WSUS or SCCM or something like that will be forced to install the newer version of Windows. Windows has decided that there will be, the forcing the updates will be the default, right? So that we stop having all those Windows XP computers that never get updated. Researcher recommends that users not leave their computer unattended during a Windows 10 update, and that users consider using the Windows 10 LTSB, or Long Time Servicing Branch version, which doesn't get the forced updates.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it says the LTSB version of Windows 10 is not affected by this as it doesn't automatically install upgrades for you.
Okay. Or I guess just turn that off.
Yeah. Furthermore, Leo says that if you're using the Windows System Center Configuration Manager can block access to the command line interface during the update procedures if users add a file called disablecmd_request.tag to their Windows directory under setup scripts. If they create that file in that folder, then the Shift F10 thing will stop working. What I found really interesting about one of the implications that you could use with this attack is, say you're the police and you've seized somebody's laptop, but it's BitLocker encrypted, so you can't access the files.
Yes.
Well, if you just wait a little bit and then, oh, look, now there's a new Windows update. So we'll boot up this laptop and just leave it sitting there at the login prompt. And then Windows will be like, this update needs installed and it's set to force and nobody's using the computer right now. Let me install this update. So reboots, starts Windows PE, Shift F10, boom, I have access to all the decrypted files.
That is not that inconceivable. That is obviously something it's for a very time sensitive thing. It's not ideal for law enforcement, but if they have the time to wait for an update, they wouldn't know necessarily. But I wonder what happens if you had a Windows 10 machine. Does it have to be the same install? Could you put the hard drive in another Windows 10 machine? It has to be the same install that's doing the update?
What do you mean?
Like, could you take the hard drive out of a laptop and put it into another machine that's running Windows 10 and install an update on that computer and get access to the data on the other hard drive?
I don't think so, because you need a BitLocker key.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I was thinking.
You have to be booting off.
So you would have to then, the only option would then be to wait for an update. But
yeah, but what's really concerning here is,
and you'd have to have physical
how is the
access.
Windows PE thing getting the password or the key to decrypt your BitLocker?
Windows itself must have.
Right, it has a memory copy, but is it writing it to the disk so that it survives across the reboot?
It must. It must. And is it outside the BitLocker encryption?
Yeah,
it must be, because if it's
exactly how is Windows PE mounting your supposedly encrypted disk such that it can do these updates?
You know what? I bet what it is, Alan, is the key must be based on your password. So you supply the password. No?
Yeah, but this is all done when you're not at your computer.
Right, yeah.
The whole point is that Windows Update is going to reboot your computer in the middle of the night.
So I just thought of that. I don't know. I don't know how it does that.
Using the TPM hardware to store it temporarily or something?
But not everybody has Maybe I don't. Maybe it has a recovery key. Windows has a recovery key that it uses.
Yeah, for the last while.
See, that EJB says that Windows, when you do BitLocker, generates a recovery key, and it has that recovery key, but it must store that recovery key outside the BitLocker protected.
Well, if it's just writing the recovery key into the Windows system partition that's not encrypted, what stops?
Because there's an extra partition that it creates that it writes the recovery key to.
Yeah, but if it's sitting there unencrypted, what stops anybody else from using that to decrypt the disk and making BitLocker pointless?
There must be something we're missing.
Sure, but yeah, in general, it seems like BitLocker is really not that robust.
I find it hard to use anything that's built into the OS or from the vendor, I should say. I mean, I wouldn't say anything built into the OS. That's the wrong way to put it.
But anything that's not open source obviously has.
That's a better way to put it. Like what I was really thinking is I wouldn't really trust Apple or Microsoft's built-in encryption. If I really, really cared. If I'm
the other problem is. Like,
what's your threat model? Is it your nosy sister?
There's that, but it's also how do you make something usable and secure?
Yeah, you don't.
If the whole point of real disk encryption is that there's the one key, and if you lose the password, your data is gone forever. And then there's customer service and customer experience where it's like, I want my data to be secure, but I want to, I need a recovery key.
And then there's the complexities of sometimes law enforcement needs access too, so that has to be built in.
Well, no.
I'll save that for the roundup. I got a story in the roundup about that. Any other thoughts on this story?
No, not for that one.
All right. Well, then let's talk about iXsystems. iXsystems.com/TechSnaps, where you go to learn more about them and support our show. iXsystems builds incredible hardware for your workload. Small business, large business, huge enterprise, incredible hardware built around these great Intel processors. iXsystems.com/TechSnap. That's where you land. Then check out their site. From the FreeNAS Mini up to the iX Rack, they got something for you. And over on the blog, I noticed a new server envy post. The Microblade, Alan. This thing that doesn't look so micro to me. But
well, that's the 6U version. There is a 3U version. Okay. So I've heard of Super Micro has the Micro Cloud,
sure,
which was like a 3U that had like maybe 8 machines in it. And I was like, ooh. And then they're like, here's a 6U version that holds 28 machines.
I'm sorry, what? 28
machines.
Oh my gosh, that works out to be 896 cores of CPU processing. Wow.
And then they
50 terabytes of ECC RAM.
Well, no, I think that careful when you're reading the numbers. One of those is for if you fill the rack with these.
Yeah.
Not just one.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. If it was a rack full of them. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
If you took 42Us and put a bunch of these in it. But what's really interesting though is that one of these fully spec'd out with Xeon Ds.
Yeah.
Is only, what is it, like 1,800 watts?
Yeah.
And in particular, if with just one of them, if you're doing virtual desktop instances or VDI, you could create 7,000 virtual desktops spread across the 28 machines, and they would end up only costing you like $30 per virtual desktop.
Wow. Yeah, this is really nuts. So the blades are powered by, like Alan just said, the Intel Xeon D processors, which have hyper-threading, obviously turbo boost. They have VTX and VTD. Yep, they have 8 cores.
Everything.
8 cores would be, this is, wow. The Xeon Ds are the new 14 nanometer microarchitecture too.
Yeah, so they actually have higher interprocessor communications than a Haswell.
Yeah.
But if you see the picture you have up there, you can see far off in the distance, you see the CPU and the RAM, right? And then in the middle, you see a blank spot.
Yeah, like a hard
That's where
drive tray.
a whole second node goes.
Oh, right, in one tray.
And then close up, you see there's a blank spot and then a hard drive.
Yeah.
That's a SSD.
Yeah.
So the blank one is for the hard drive for the closer one, and the one you're looking at there is the hard drive for the far away one. So each of those blades is actually 2 complete systems.
That is so awesome.
CPU, RAM, and
they're narrower. I'd say they're about they seem like they're about half the width of what I would used to associate as a blade. Like they seem like, I mean, they're just, this is so cool. This is
and then the back is just all power supplies.
Yeah, well, for sure, right?
Well, what's nice is that part of this design in particular is about reducing the cabling. If you imagine if you did like 28 1U servers and you put them in a rack, and you're going to have like 2 1 gigabit or 10 gigabit network cables coming out of the back of each one, plus a dedicated cable for the management system, plus the dual power cables, and plus any other stuff, that's going to be a lot of cables. Whereas with this chassis design, you get a bunch of 40 gig QSFP connectors, or those can be broken out with an adapter to 4 10 gig adapters if you don't have 40 gig equipment. But you get like 80 gigabits of networking out of the back of it, out of just a couple of ports. And then you also have a unified management system. So you hook up one set for the IPMI and you get half the machines done at once. And so with only a couple of cables, you have all the power, all the networking, and all the management you need for 28 whole computers.
Wow. Yeah. Check them out. iXsystems.com/TechSNAP, and a big thank you to iXsystems for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Wow, that's awesome. iXsystems.com/TechSNAP's where you go. So the observant of you out there will notice that we are closely approaching episode 300, which blows my mind, Alan. Is really kind of incredible. And that is going to be a major milestone for this show. And so there's going to be a transition that starts to take place. And we wanted to give you guys a heads up about it because I think it's something that behind the scenes we've been talking about for a while, but we wanted to communicate it to you when we were pretty much firm on all of the details. And so I'm kind of nervous to say, but I'm also very excited to announce that at 300 we'll be making a big switch. Alan and I will step aside and we will make room for new blood to come into the show with new perspectives and new ideas and tons of industry experience. Some of you out there already know these people. Some of you out there have probably had many conversations with these people. They're people from the Jupiter Broadcasting community. And are we ready to say who they are? Do you want to announce it?
Sure, I'm ready.
Let's start with Dan because this was Alan's replacement. It was Alan's hand-selected replacement, and I'm super excited about Dan. And I got to meet Dan in person at Meet BSD. So why Dan?
Dan Langill has been a close friend of mine for a while. But what was interesting was a couple of years ago at BSD Can, I told him about the podcast, and so he added it to his iTunes, and then I started watching on Twitter as I watched him start all the way at the beginning or the end of it and watch every single episode of TechSNAP. And then, this next year at BSD Can, he's wearing the TechSNAP t-shirt and we talked about it quite a bit. And he is, he's been a sysadmin much longer than me. He's his blog about being a sysadmin and the little tips and tricks and so on that he's learned over the years is what I followed when I was first getting into BSD. His blog about, being a sysadmin was really what helped me get my start. And now with his day job being a sysadmin at the Cisco Talos research group means that he has lots of experience and hands-on knowledge about exactly the type of stuff that we'd like to cover on this show.
Yeah.
And I thought that now that I don't have the time to be able to do 2 podcasts every week because being on the FreeBSD core team and my business keeping me very, very busy, that I wanted to make sure that TechSNAP got to keep going, even if I couldn't do it anymore, and make sure that it was somebody who I knew would actually be able to, talk intelligently about this stuff and also answer people's questions.
Yeah, I think people are really going to like Dan. And
so I'm going to be really jealous when he does a better job than me.
I know. Well, legitimately, who's going to do a better job than me will be Wes from Linux Unplugged, my co-host. And it's something I've been thinking about recently, or sort of a fantasy, is I realized doing Linux Unplugged with Wes that he's a better sysadmin than I ever was. And he's now working with technologies that have come along since I have been in the industry. Now that I'm a full-time podcaster, I haven't been working on some of this stuff day to day. And some of the coolest technologies that I barely kind of understand and follow, just that way I can stay informed, he's hands-on with them every single day. And so Wes has been on Linux Unplugged for a while now, and I've watched him really grow as a podcaster from a newbie to somebody who's really comfortable and has a great rapport with the audience. And he has brought some of the best technical content to Linux Unplugged over the last few months some of the deepest technical content we've ever done. So I think the two of them, with fresh perspectives, is going to be kind of a lot like when Alan and I started back in episode 1, kind of from the beginning again. And I am hoping you guys will stick with it and give them a chance, because just like we were a little rough at the beginning, they might be a little rough at the beginning because they're new. But yeah, I think they're taking something that's really been put together with a great community. They both follow the show. Wes also watches. And I think they're positioned to really take off. And if you guys stay with them, I think they have a chance to really make maybe another 300 great episodes of the show. So Alan and I are here for the rest of the run till 300.
Yep.
Then we got a new year and a new TechSNAP.
But yeah,
I'm a little nervous because it's like this has been my life now for so long, but I'm also super excited for them because we couldn't have picked better people to replace us. So
yeah, I definitely want to make sure I had someone that I didn't want to just have the show go downhill after I left Twitter, right?
Yeah.
But also, it's like just thinking about the fact that it's basically been 6 years of every single Thursday without missing one ever. We've pre-recorded a couple times, but that always meant having 2+ weeks notice that we knew we were going to be missing that Thursday. And every single Thursday has still been, we've done a TechSNAP.
Yeah.
Like the one time you were gone and we pre-recorded ahead of time and I had a Thursday off, I didn't know what to do.
I know. It's so weird when,
I got so
that happens.
much work done on a Thursday. How does this work?
I know. And since the show began, the business for me has grown just insanely. And so I have way more responsibilities there, but I also have new projects that I'm taking on. And you've obviously taken on a whole bunch of projects with the FreeBSD community. So it's a good time for us to do a nice clean break with a new year, 300 episodes without missing a run is our intention. We're at 295 right now. And so
screwed up now, I'll beat you.
Yeah, I know, right? And don't forget too, Alan's not going away. He'll still be doing the BSD Now program, so you can still get your weekly
every
Jude.
Wednesday.
Yep. Every Wednesday. And in fact, speaking of BSD Now, sandboxing cohabitation. I thought those two things weren't possible. Episode 170.
It's just the two things that the episode happens to be about.
Oh, okay.
We have a thing about the pledge sandboxing for OpenBSD, and then we have an instruction guide on how to have a root on ZFS pool dual booting Linux and FreeBSD. So you have FreeBSD and Linux living in the same ZFS pool and letting you flip back and forth between them.
That's fancy.
Lots of people have wanted that for a while.
Yeah. So that's episode 170.
So we have a tutorial on how to do that.
Cool, man. Check it out. The BSD Now program is a good time to get it because we're at the halfway mark of the show. So you can start downloading the HD version and get full definition Jude with episode 170 of the BSD Now program. And with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your email to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website. I probably should have mentioned this before we left the iXsystems talking about Meet BSD and all that stuff. But now, after a couple of weeks, I am happy to announce that the videos I recorded on my trip to Meet BSD and at Meet BSD are out. Really, it's right now... I would say 4 of them, although you might as well just watch the first one because it's only 4 minutes long. But there's 4 if you include our meetup that we did with all the Jupiter Broadcasting peeps. You can see a little bit of Alan and Dan giving their ZFS talk at Meet BSD, including one of my favorite typical Alan Jude moments is in there. And tomorrow, if you're following it, by the way, you can find it at youtube.com/Chris Fisher. I probably should have said that. Tomorrow, I think the best video I've ever created in my life comes out. It's a big video, literally life-changing, and I put a lot of work into it, and I managed to pull off some things that I've never done before. So check it out, youtube.com/Chris Fisher, and all of the ones up there right now are all relevant to Meet BSD. And then starting in like 2 days, it's me leaving California. So they're coming out daily until next Tuesday right now is the plan.
Cool.
And then the project's all wrapped up, the grand experiment.
I think I've seen the first 2, and then that was all I could find. And then I stumbled into a video of you and Noah installing a
the NAS and the switch and the UPS.
Couple of tips. Don't put the NAS near a subwoofer.
No, we unplugged the subwoofer.
Okay. Yeah.
Thump.
Hard drives plus vibration.
Yeah, not good. Not good. Not going down the road either. Going down the road is also bad. All right, so we got some emails. I'm wondering if you have any tips for this one. Chris wrote in, not this Chris, another one, and said, "Hi, Alan and Chris. Please, could you tell me if there's any two-factor authentication available for pfSense's web interface or the shell?" We actually got this email in. I don't know if it was both from Chris, but we got it in twice this week. So I don't know. Maybe SSH might be easier.
Most of the SSH two-factor things that would work on FreeBSD should work on a pfSense. Although, because of the way the pfSense file system is structured, it might be slightly more difficult to set up.
Okay. Okay.
For the web interface, I'm not aware of anything. It'd be a good suggestion to make on their forum, maybe.
Yeah, I looked around before the show, and I didn't see anything.
Yeah, for SSH, most of the things that will work on vanilla FreeBSD would work on pfSense. It's just a little bit harder to configure them, or the configuration will have to go in a non-standard place because of the way pfSense is structured as a. Right. It's currently, I think most of the versions that are out now are NanoBSD based. I know their newer versions are going to be ZFS based. I don't know which version that starts at though.
Oh, interesting.
And so pfSense is currently in the process of moving to something more like a package you would run on top of vanilla FreeBSD, making it much easier to handle things like this.
Ideal. Now, in my reading, I did see a lot of the services you run on top of pfSense, like OpenVPN and other things. Those are two-factorable.
Yeah, because those, they have their standard config file. So if you can two-factor them on one OS, you can do it on the other. Yeah. It's just for the web interface, I don't think so. The SSH, yes, although it might be a bit of extra work to set it up.
So Dreams Void writes in, he wants to put all his eggs in one dangerous basket. He says, "Hey, Chris and Alan, I have a stupid idea, and that's to put all of my eggs in one basket. How? I'm going to use Unraid on Metal, which is a Linux-based virtualization that makes it super easy to do PCI pass-through, which is like a checkbox. Then I'm going to install Ubuntu, Windows, and FreeNAS instances on top of it. I will do PCI pass-through."
What? How are you doing Unraid on the Metal and then PCI pass-through?
Well, so the Unraid virtualizer does PCI pass-through. So you set up Unraid.
So are the disks in an Unraid, or are the disks being passed through into FreeNAS?
I don't know. I think it would depend on. So you have the option in Unraid to choose which devices get passed through, and so you could just have it storage on.
Unraid isn't the file system,
right? You don't have to use it that way. You could just use it for its virtualization features, which it sounds like he's doing.
Which is weird because I swear there was something called Unraid before that was just a file system.
Yeah.
Why is there something called Unraid that's a hypervisor?
Well, so Unraid is a Linux-based NAS product that over the last couple of years has added in a whole bunch of these kinds of features.
Okay.
Yeah. People love it.
So if you're passing through the disk directly to FreeNAS, you're really not using Unraid, and so you should be okay.
Yeah, so basically Unraid's the virtualizer. He says my graphics card to Windows, and I'll set my graphics card to Windows so I can NVIDIA game stream to a Raspberry Pi. I'm using it as my desktop. This guy is crazy. My questions are, what can I do to help a single point of failure other than moving the OS to other machines? I've got another Pi I could set up to replicate the array of FreeNAS and maybe VMs, but I'm not sure how I would do that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's just a giant snapshot, although it's only 4 terabytes of data. So he's got Nextcloud on Ubuntu. He's going to use a network share on FreeNAS with some form of array. Windows using FreeNAS shares as well for like Steam games, all virtualized on top of Unraid. What suggestions do you have to help with one giant single point of failure for protecting my data? Love the show.
Well, it depends on what you mean by single point of failure. So if you're using FreeNAS and passing through the disk and using like RAID Z2, then any one hard drive is not going to take you out. Now, if the power goes out on that hypervisor machine, then yes, everything's going to be offline.
That's what I was going to say. UPS, redundant power, get good power. Get UPSs, get redundant power if you can.
But like in the end, they're,
Watch your temperature.
Yeah, but like, if the power is out at your house, then you probably don't care that your NAS is down.
Right. That's why I'm saying they'll go with a UPS, because then you can have it auto shut down, which would be good.
Right.
So that's how you're going to have data integrity, really.
Recover, but
yeah.
So
Raspberry Pi is
point of failure from data integrity, as long as you're using RAID Z2 and you're using real disks passed through, not using silliness like giving virtual disks to FreeNAS from the actual unraid thing, then it's probably okay. But yeah, like if the power goes out and takes out your NAS, your unraid box, then you're not going to care that you can't stream games to your TV that is also out of power.
Right. Yeah, very much. All right, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I take that answer, Alan.
Yeah. Replicating the FreeNAS to another machine is a good step. If you break your data up into different data sets, then it's not just one giant snapshot. You'll have a bunch of separate smaller snapshots, which makes it a little easier to replicate, or to say, hey, I want to replicate all these important files and not these other files.
There you go. And Jackpot in our chat room wants you to know that you should buy ECC RAM. He's very, very concerned.
Yeah, if you can, but I'm sure the unraid thing isn't going to come with that. So you should buy
the unraid thing.
XL, but
while we're talking about virtualization, let's talk about ESXi. So this comes in from Carl, and he says, when virtualizing on ESXi, our practice has been to create VMDKs on a ZFS-backed storage network. I'd like to know if there is a safe and reasonably performant way to do the opposite, running ZFS on the VMDKs for certain corner cases. I know that the common best practice is to give ZFS direct control of hard disks with simple host bus adapters, removing abstractions as much as and things like hardware RAID. That accurately describes all of our current setup. I'm imagining an alternative scenario for for certain VMs where there would be a benefit to running ZFS directly within the guest VM, but without needing to pass through an entire HBA. I can imagine a scenario in which multiple simple non-RAID disk drives owned by ESXi could each be defined as an ESXi data store, comprising a single VMDK. On the ESXi guest, the VM running ZFS could assemble the VMDK data stores into VDEVs the same way VDEVs are normally assembled from disks. Are there any risks to data integrity in such a scenario?
Yeah, because you can't, when ZFS asks, hey, is this data all the way on the hardware, ESXi might lie and say it is when it's actually not all the way written into the VMDK. And also, the file system used by ESXi underneath to store the VMDK isn't copy on write, so if the power goes out, it's unclean. And, who knows what your data ends up looking like. Now, ZFS might be able to recover from that, but it's not very ideal. Your ideal way to do it would be to create almost a diskless VM where it's actually pulling in ZFS over NFS or something.
Okay, now tell me about this.
So for playing around, running ZFS inside the VM is fine. It's a great way to play with ZFS. It's just not as good for data integrity because, you end up caching the data in the VM and outside of the VM. And with all that caching, it's not invalidated properly, and you can't be sure.
So it's not about
everything's actually reaching the disk all the time.
So it's not about, like, what he found in his research is that people were quoting best practices about not getting smart data, and it's not about that. I've never heard about this, the fact that you're caching inside the VM and outside the VM.
It depends. If you're running ZFS on the storage and then ZFS in the VM, you're running ZFS twice, right?
Right.
But also, but the biggest concern there is it's not so much smart data, which we will lose, but just if there is an error on the disk or something, it'll keep retrying underneath or something instead of giving the error to ZFS.
So it won't handle failures as elegantly.
Yeah, the chat room suggests probably what makes the most sense is instead of using VMDKs, if on the underlying thing you could do iSCSI and have the ESXi use iSCSI to real disks as the way of providing the disks into the VM, that would probably be a lot better than doing VMDKs. Yeah, VMDKs have some features, and they're trying to do copy on write and stuff of their own, and there's that much more complexity that has a chance to go wrong.
He's hoping to assemble those VMDKs as VDEVs.
Yeah, and have redundancy. Yeah, but you never know what ESXi is going to do with that VMDK. Whereas if you pass raw disks, instead of having to, I understand you don't want to, you have one host bus adapter with lots of drives and you don't want to give them all to one VM. So maybe iSCSI is the best way to go to pass individual disks, these 6 individual disks into this VM and these 6 into this other VM.
Okay.
Hopefully that's possible for you, and it's probably your best bet. Otherwise, for questions like this one in particular, check out the second or third interview we did with Josh Petzel on BSD Now, because we asked him these questions, and he knows a lot more about it than I do. I don't use VMware very much, but he, working at iXsystems, deals with all their customers that do VMware all day, every day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, George writes in with a ZFS question to sort of finish out the question rounds before we get to the Backblaze stats. So he says, greetings. I have a pair of NASs set up at different locations using Ting VPN through a DigitalOcean droplet. One is my main NAS at home, and the other is at my parents' house 4 hours away. Both are running Open Media Vault with ZFS with 2 terabyte drives and a single mirror set. So the total is a little bit less than 1 terabyte used. Currently, I'm using SyncThing to sync between the 2 NASs. It works well enough, but I wanted to look into using ZFS Send in place of SyncThing. A couple of questions regarding this, though. One, is there any way to do this without sending everything again? My upstream is only 5 megabits a second, so having to send the entire snapshot would be painful, and the pool names are different as well. But I'm pretty sure I can rename it, or would that even be necessary? So that's part one.
The pool names definitely don't need to be the same. Sadly, you will have to send the data again. Even if the data is the same, it's laid out differently and has different object numbers. And ZFS really depends on having them have the same globally unique IDs all the way across.
Drive there.
So
it's worth it.
The advantage to using SyncThing is that updates made from either side get synced bidirectionally, where ZFS Send is one direction only. Now, if you have a data set at your house with all your stuff and a second data set with that's the read-only copy of your parents' stuff, and just have the opposite on the other end, then that's fine because each way is only going one direction. But if you have some shared directory that is being written to by both sides, SyncThing is a better solution.
There you go. Then part 2 of the question, the remote NAS is extremely subpar hardware. Since it's only an offsite backup, I haven't been too worried about it. It's an Atom D525 with 4 gigs of RAM. Is that going to cause issues with ZFS Send? SyncThing's mostly CPU usage, and since it's doing virtually nothing else, that hasn't really been an issue. Thanks for the time.
ZFS Send is probably going to be even easier on the CPU because the only bottleneck really will be the CPU to SSH encrypt or whatever over your tunnel, and usually with your internet speeds, it's not going to be enough to saturate the CPU at all.
Good stuff. All right, so it's that time of year again. We get the Q3 2016 update from Backblaze on their hard drive death stats. I like the headline, less is more. This is compelling. Where are we going? What do we see?
Well, part of the other thing they did during this is describe their migration by getting rid of most of their 2 terabyte drives and replacing them with 8 terabyte drives.
Oh, interesting.
It's like, so we ended up with slightly fewer hard drives for the first time ever, but we went from 9 terabytes to 40 terabytes of storage. So we have the stats for just what happened between July 1st and September 30th. And you can see they have mostly single-digit failures. They have, 278 of the Seagate 4 terabyte drives died, but considering they have 34,000 of those instead of, like 900 of the HDST ones, that makes a difference. In general, we see failure stats where most of them are about on target at the 3-ish%, although the HDST ones are doing even better than that, although the Western Digital 6 terabyte drives were doing much worse than that. But when we average it out over a longer period of time, it doesn't look so bad. The next tables are talking about their migration where they had like 4,400 2 terabyte drives, which gave them just less than 9 terabytes of storage. And then when they ended Q3 2013, they had 5,100 8 terabyte drives, which gave them 41 terabytes of storage.
Oh, all right. All right.
It's like, that's some storage you have there.
I'll take it, please. I could use that. I could use that.
Yeah,
I really.
And then comparing the failure stats on their 2 terabyte drives, where the HGST drives had an annualized failure rate of 1.6%, and they found that so far the 8 terabyte drives have the same 1.6% failure rate. So, because it's fewer drives, that adds up to even better for them. But in general, going to bigger drives is better for them, even if they fail more. But currently, it looks like they're failing about the same amount, and so they're quite happy.
Good for them. That sounds like a great move. They're out of the funk.
Yep.
Wow.
But yeah, so the general takeaways are that the HDSG drives are the most reliable, although they have they're still buying mostly the Seagate 4 and 8 terabyte drives because they are easy to get in high quantities. They have good reliability, and they have the best smart data. Western Digital drives they found have really poor smart data. Like, don't give any signal before they die, and just have fewer of the stats that are useful. And then, yes, we talked about their migration from 2 to 8 terabyte drives and so on. And then, yeah, but the next table here actually shows the overall looking from 2013 through to the end of September. We can see their annualized failure rates that some of the Western Digital drives did the worst there with their the Western Digital 2 terabyte drives. In total, it doesn't say how many they actually had of the 2 terabyte drives, but they were in service for 66,553 days, of which 15 of them died, leading to an annualized failure rate of 8.2%. But the Seagate 4 terabyte drives, they've had in service for 20 million days.
Oh.
But, if you have 1,000 drives in service for 1 day, that's 1,000 drive days. So if you have 35,000 drives in service for 2 years, then it adds up really quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have a million of the Seagate 6 terabyte drives, of which they've seen a failure rate of 1.2%, which is looking good. And then they have the Seagate 8 terabyte drives, of which they've had 18 fail for a failure rate of 1.6%. So it looks like the new Seagate drives, looking at the model numbers, I think these are the Barracuda line, not the Iron Wolf line, which is the NAS drives, which are slightly more money. I would, Backblaze doesn't buy those. It would be interesting to see reliability stats comparing the two.
I agree.
Because I think the price difference is about $20 a drive, which for Backblaze would add up if you're buying 35,000 drives. But for your home rig with maybe 6 or 8 drives, it might actually end up, if the drive's slightly more reliable, it might be worth it.
I love they publish this.
And they also have a video. They have a webinar, 45 minutes worth, if you want to sign up and look at that as well.
Now that's hardcore. That if you watch that, you're officially hardcore.
Yeah. And then a recap, they're talking about their thought. They're evaluating if they want to migrate all their 3 terabyte drives to Seagate's new 10 terabyte drives. Although those are still relatively pricey, and although per gigabyte they're not bad, but being the very top end of size of drives you can get, they're slightly more than smaller drives, and they have the space to be able to just buy more slightly smaller drives for whichever drive has the lowest price per gigabyte. It makes most sense for them generally. Although at some point, buying fewer 10 terabyte drives rather than the equivalent number of drives to get the same storage space in, say, 4 terabyte drives ends up saving them a lot of power, maybe. So, many considerations there.
Mm-hmm. So we have a link to that with the stats. Some of the most interesting tidbits already broken out in the show notes, linked over there at 295. So look for TechSNAP 295 at the JupiterBroadcasting.com website, and you'll find it all there. So also, while you're there, send us in your questions. Get it into us over at JupiterBroadcasting.com/contact and choose TechSNAP from the dropdown, or email us directly, TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com. Just put something that would catch my attention in the subject line if you email us directly. That's your best bet. Now with the feedback all done, it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't fit at the top of the show, but we still wanted to give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And some of these links came from the subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. And you probably heard about this first story this week. The San Francisco Muni was hit with ransomware, and they had to let passengers ride for free. Sounds like kind of a good deal.
So basically, ransomware is going around scanning for vulnerabilities and infecting the machines. They found apparently, I don't know, the message from the bad guy is machine translated from Russian or Ukrainian or something. So it's a bit hard to understand, but it sounds like it was some kind of Java exploit and that the Moody might have still been using Windows 2000.
No. Shocker. So they couldn't. Now, people were freaking out, but like it didn't affect the trains or the safety systems. Like the trains still ran.
Ticket sales system. So yeah,
and Krebs has a story on it as well.
A ransom of 100 bitcoins, which is about $73,000.
You are hacked. Your HDD is encrypted. Yeah. This Krebs has a picture here what appears to be the same malware from a cell phone from the
Krebs'
1990s.
Story is interesting. So Krebs has a follow-up to this story where the hacker who did this was hacked.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so a security researcher saw the news article about the San Francisco Moody, and so he looked at the email address, which is cryptom27@yandex.com, and he went there and brute forced the secret questions and answers on that account and reset the password. Once he dug into it, he found in the settings that it was set up with a backup email address of cryptom2016@yandex.com. And then he brute forced that one, which happened to use the same secret questions and answers. And in it found various messages and so on, including other people that had been extorted. This is they found 100 bitcoins may seem like a lot, but it's apparently not far from the usual payday for this attacker. November 20th, hacked emails show that he successfully extorted 63 bitcoins, or about $45,000, from a U.S.-based manufacturing firm. They found in total that he had made about $140,000 U.S. From various victims at this point. He says this is almost certainly a conservative estimate on his overall earnings within the past few months. The source who hacked the accounts said he was unable to hack yet another Yandex inbox that used the username W8899016665 at yandex.com, and that one appears to have been used in other strains of the malware. Copies of the messages shared with the author answered many questions raised by news media. Specifically, it turns out the SFMTA was not specifically targeted. Messages sent to the attacker's address show a financial relationship with at least two different hosting providers. The credentials needed to manage one of these servers were included in the attacker's inbox in plain text. So the bad guy rented a server or a VPS somewhere, and they, as part of the setup, sent him the root username and password. And they're sitting in his inbox. So when they hacked his email, they were able to get into his servers.
Yeah, you got to change that default email or default password if that ever happens.
Yep. So Krebs got his friend Alex Holden to dig into those servers. And he says, it appears our attacker has been using a number of tools which enable the scanning of large portions of the internet and several specific targets for vulnerabilities. The most common vulnerability uses WebLogic unserialized exploit, specifically targeting Oracle's Primavera project portfolio management software. According to a review of email messages from the Cryptome27 account shared by the source, the attacker routinely offered to help victims secure their system from other hackers for a small number of extra bitcoins after they paid the ransom.
That's funny.
In one case, a victim had just forked over 20 bitcoin ransom, seemed all too eager to pay more for tips on how to plug the security holes that got him hacked in the first place. In return, the hacker pasted a link to a web server and urged the victim to install a critical security patch from the company's Java application. This is read this and install patches before you connect your server to the internet again, the attacker said, linking to an Oracle advisory for the security hole. Although he could have just as easily linked to another virus and infected them again.
Really?
He says, in many cases, the extortionist told the victims their data would be gone forever if they didn't pay the ransom within 48 hours or less. In other instances, he threatens to increase the ransom each day that they don't pay. And then they dig into actually trying to figure out who the person behind the email account is. So if you're interested in more in that, you should check out the Krebs article. Very detailed, as usual.
As usual. Very nice, Mr. Jude. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to mention just a brief update. We are following the Snoopers Charter law that just passed, and it appears that there's a real. I mean, it feels like this one part of this law that is now coming to light would have caused a huge upset in the U.S. Among many, many of the unpleasant things in the Investigatory Powers Act is the ability, apparently, for the UK government to undermine encryption and demand surveillance backdoors. In effect, the UK government has written into law a version of the much hated Burr-Feinstein bill proposed in the US, which would have done the same thing. But the backlash, it derailed that, thankfully. And so it reads, obligations relating to the removal by a relevant operator of electronic protection applied by or on behalf of that operator to any communications or data.
Yeah. The fact that the government doesn't understand how this can't be done properly the way they want.
Technical capability. The government really means backdoors and deliberate security weaknesses. Yeah. Yeah. It's the investigative report or the Snoopers Charter is one of the worst things that we've seen in a long time on this show. And it has massive ramifications. Like, how is that going to affect open source? How is that going to affect projects like pfSense and OpenSSH?
Yep. No, and you won't be able to download it in the UK is the worst case, I suppose.
I remember GeoCities back in the day. So is this the data center from GeoCities?
Yeah, so this is a picture of GeoCities' cage at the Exodus data center in 1999.
Awesome.
And it talks a little bit about what some of the hardware is. But mostly it's just giant shelves and shelves of disks connected to some sandboxes.
Wow. They were using NFS and RAID 4. Yep. With the waffle file system, right anywhere file layout, waffle file system.
NetApp, isn't it? I think it's NetApp that does waffle. Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. That's great. There's more than one picture. There's a lot of pictures.
You see what some of the wiring look like?
Yeah. Wow. Check that. That is a trip down memory lane. It even has
stuff about the earthquake proofing because they had all these racks towering with hard drives all over the top and they didn't want them to fall over, right?
Just so the friends across the pond don't feel left out, the FBI is gaining those expanded hacking powers we warned you about. It would look like it was all on track to be interrupted, but a last-ditch effort in the Senate to block or deny the rule changes that would expand the U.S. government's hacking powers failed yesterday, despite concerns the changes would jeopardize the privacy rights of innocent Americans. Now, this was being really fought by Ron Wyden, Democratic senator out of Oregon. He attempted 3 times to delay the changes, which take effect today, and allow U.S. judges, they'll be able to issue search warrants to give the FBI the authority to remotely access computers in any jurisdiction, potentially even overseas. It was also thanks to John Cornyn of Texas that Wyden was blocked. The changes allow judges to issue warrants in cases when a suspect is simply using anonymizing technology, such as Tor, to conceal a location of his or her computer. Or if your computer looks to be hacked or infected.
If your computer's been hacked, we're allowed to hack it too.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Well, that's too bad. I mean, what really gets me is using Tor is enough justification. Or probably a VPN, because it's anonymizing. They probably claim a VPN too. Mm-hmm. So I think the only appropriate response is for all of us to double down on our uses of VPN, encryption, and Tor. We just have to normalize it. It's the only thing you can do, or come up with something else. Momo Fox has a tweet that's made it into the roundup this week.
Yes, so this is a screenshot from, I'm not sure which forum or whatever, but one of my favorite programming stories on how Insomniac Games exploited their own game to patch a bug.
Oh.
So this is the story of the game Ratchet and Clank, Up Your Arsenal, which was an online title that shipped without the ability to patch itself. So it was one of the early online console games, and it didn't have the ability to patch itself. So the game downloads and displays an end-user license agreement each time it's launched. That's just an ASCII text file stored in a static buffer. This buffer is filled from the server without checking that the size is within the buffer's capability. So, if the server were ever to send it too large of a text, it would overflow. So we exploited this fact to cause the EULA download to overflow the static buffer far enough to also write to a known global variable. This variable happens to be the function callback handler for a specific network packet. Once this handler was installed, we could send the network packet and cause a jump to the address with the overwritten data. The address was a pointer to some payload code that was stored earlier in the EULA data. Now, valuable data did exist between the end of the EULA buffer and the overwritten global. So our first job was to design a payload code that would overflow the EULA buffer, but actually overwrite the important data in the middle with the same data so as to actually not destroy it. So they had to construct a EULA that was the EULA text, a bunch of padding, and then when it overflows the buffer, it's actually going to be exactly the same data. So they're overwriting data with a copy of itself, so it doesn't go crazy. And then the corruption at the end to actually do remote code execution. So one complication is that the EULA text is copied with stir copy, and stir copy stops as soon as it finds a null byte or a 0 byte, because that normally marks the end of the string. Our string contained code that often contained 0 bytes. So we had to mutate the compiled code such that it contained no 0 bytes and had a carefully crafted bit of bootstrap assembly to unmutate it. So they had to have a bit of code. So they had to change what the EULA to basically change all the null bytes to something else. And then a bit of assembly at the top that would find it and turn them back into null bytes after they had been copied, after they had overflowed the buffer, and then fix it up so that it could run. So in the end, their hack was send an oversized EULA that overflows the EULA buffer with some miscellaneous data and then the callback handler pointer. Then, with the disassembler or the assembly code that would fix up the null bytes, then send a packet to trigger the code they had just added via the overflow. Then the game jumps to that bootstrap code pointed to by the handler. The bootstrap would decode the payload data. The payload then downloads and stores the stop miscellaneous data, and then they could execute a patch and patch the game. And their patch included a proper patcher to be able to use that on. And then a couple other people in this Twitter thread have also added their own funny stories, like dirty game development tricks.
Oh, good. That's probably pretty good to read through.
But yes, the Twitter thread is pretty funny to watch. And then obviously somebody's got a GIF here from hackers with the guys like pulling out 2 floppy disks like they're knives or something.
I like internet humor. Amazon's been busy this week. They're launching Amazon Light Sail. They say it's just like, wait, no, don't say the DigitalOcean name. It's not just like DigitalOcean. They say it's a simple cloud service.
With exactly the same pricing and VM sizes as digital. This is very clearly Amazon trying to make a DigitalOcean killer.
Yeah, I think, in this particular case, though, competition's always good. And
but the big thing DigitalOcean has going for it is exactly what you're going to pay. With Amazon, there's all these other, it's like, oh, that costs extra. And you went over the limit, that'll be this much more.
I had a former Amazon employee who worked in the Amazon IT area tell me, he's like, I don't think DigitalOcean has much to worry about. I've seen what Amazon's infrastructure runs on. Some of it's not so solid. So either way, I think competition's great. And so not the only Amazon announcement we have in the roundup, but so Amazon Light Sail, their new virtual private service. And I'm sure it'll tie in pretty handsomely with all the Amazon services.
This is the whole point, is Amazon's worried that too many people, especially developers, are using DigitalOcean for their small projects because Amazon's too expensive. So like, we'll just make exactly the same plans, here's the $5, $10, $20 VMs, except we'll let you also connect to, EC2 or to like S3 and all the other stuff. It's like, yeah, but all that costs extra money.
Mm-hmm.
And, also, if you need extra bandwidth from DigitalOcean, it's like 5 cents or 2 cents, something like that. Amazon is still the full 9 cents.
I think also it's going to put a lot of pressure on businesses like Linode that have
Vultr and a bunch of other ones that are very similar to DigitalOcean. Although in the one article that I saw, I don't know if it's one you saw, but there was actually a comment from Linode at the end of the article.
I didn't see that.
One of the Linode says we're not worried because we've been doing this a long time and we know how to treat our people.
I would imagine DigitalOcean probably feels the same way.
Same way. It's like, DigitalOcean, it's if you sign up for the $5 one, it's going to be $5. With Amazon, you sign up for the $5 one, you might get a giant bill the next week or next month.
Either way, though, I'm glad to see people bringing the competition, and it's obvious that DigitalOcean set the bar. Okay.
Yeah, we could just when Amazon uses exactly the same instance sizes with the same amounts of RAM for the same price.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Okay. All right. They said it. That's cool. So tell me about this certificate support in SSH or what? What is this?
Yeah, this is a giant tutorial-ish thing with a funny layout that explains how to use certificates with SSH instead of necessarily keys so that you can revoke them and things like that.
It has a clock that follows me as I scroll and a menu up here.
Yeah, it's a little
intense.
Old-fashioned web design.
But the information is very, very valuable.
Yes, exactly. So if you're interested in using SSH with more centralized control, check it out.
Like I said, Amazon is busy this week. They're launching AWS Shield, which is a competitor with Cloudflare. AWS Shield is generally available today and is already turned on for free for all web applications that run on AWS. No action by developer is required. The service is based on the work Amazon has done, the Elastic Load Balancer, CloudFront CDN, and Route 53 DNS service. It offers developers automatic protection against the kind of DDoS attacks that are becoming more frequent. Free service. And they say it'll protect applications against 96% of the most common attacks.
Maybe or maybe not. Like a couple of ways of it sounds more like a web application firewall, which is something that like Cloudflare does as well. But that doesn't protect applications that aren't web-based.
Right.
Or it doesn't tell you if the attack is just UDP flood or something.
Yeah, if I want to run back-end services for my iPhone app, if they're not on if they're not on 80 or 443, am I going to get protection?
Well, yeah, in particular, if they're not using HTTP, because their CloudFront thing is just basically an HTTP proxy. And then it just says, oh, this request has SQL injection and drops it. That's one thing. I don't know.
Interesting, though, that what I find to be noteworthy about this story is even if it's just HTTP proxying, what was once could be an entire business's industry. Like that could be what a company does is now just something free that Google and Amazon are just giving away.
Well, Amazon's not giving it away for free.
Well, that's true.
Google only gives it to free to people they like.
So when I say free, I mean they're just including it as a bundled feature.
Right, but they're still going to charge you for it. So.
Yeah, oh, for sure. All right, so this is a good one. The Internet Archive is building a Canadian copy to protect itself from Donald Trump?
Well, not just Donald Trump, but the new FBI rules and all the things in general.
I guess you have to put Trump in the headline, though, right? Because that gets clicks.
Yeah, well, that was TechCrunch, not me. Or not TechCrunch.
Verge, yeah.
Verge,
no, I know.
But yeah, so the Internet Archive is set up basically got a whole bunch of data center space up here in Toronto, and they're going to create a complete backup of their 15 petabytes of data to here so that, and it's rather than being owned by the Internet Archive charity in the US, it's a separate Canadian charity called like Internet Archive Canada or whatever.
Brilliant.
They're affiliated, but it's separate so that they have the full protection of the Canadian government.
That is such...
and it also means that donations to it are tax deductible in Canada.
Also handy. They should do more of this. I think that's great. This is one of the stories I'm the most excited about this week. This is going to solve some serious problems for Chris, so I wanted to share it with you guys. Plex is now getting its very own Kodi add-on that you add on to Kodi, and you can use your Plex database as the backend for Kodi. This is so brilliant because Kodi is a really fantastic media player, and it has the ability to play over local file shares, which I prefer over HTTP streaming. I prefer to just I have a Samba NFS mount already on the system. Just pull it from the file system, and that makes like for jumping around in a long movie instantaneously fast. Just boom, boom, pop, pop, pop on my TV. I can fast forward through anything. Without any lag. With the HTTP streaming, it stops, it reconnects, it requests that part of the file, and then it starts streaming again. And if there's any kind of conversion happening on the back end, because Plex often uses conversion to make it work, it takes even longer, whereas Kodi supports way more file systems played natively. And now I can use my Plex database to power the information in Kodi. It's such a nice system. It's the level of awesomeness that these...
The Plex plugin for FreeNAS has just got that much more useful.
Yeah, and the level of awesomeness that you can now achieve with like an Android set-top TV box or a Roku and some of this stuff is so awesome. All the years I spent trying to build different media servers.
I didn't see the details, but also saw Plex is dropping the subscription requirement for some of its services.
Yeah,
for like some stuff.
There's like a desktop media player and stuff. All that kind of stuff's now free. Yeah, well, more information in that link. So Schneier's got a post here to sort of start rounding down the roundup. That's a key to Internet of Security incentives, which is sort of a topic we've been getting a lot of email about. So this is good.
Yeah. So this is Snyder's thoughts on what we have to do to incentivize companies to actually care about IoT security instead of just pumping them their crapware on us.
Yeah. Oh, so sort of like legal threats or incentives that would make companies maybe snap into gear, perhaps, or other fines or things like that. All kinds of different stuff, I suppose you could do. So it's probably a good read if you've been thinking about this and you've been emailing us about this. Now, I thought this is just fun. I don't really expect anybody to care. It's just fun. This, for some reason, has happened. Slack is now working on the Commodore 64. Obviously, that was important. First you get IRC working, then you get Slack on the Commodore. It really uses a little Raspberry Pi magic, too, to make it all happen. But it does look pretty cool. I gotta say, I actually would like using Slack more like this, I think. Look how good that looks. That's super funny. So you can check out the link with the GIFs or the GIFs, whatever you want to call them, in the show notes. Yeah. Now, our very last link for the roundup this week is one that is, I guess, fairly interactive. It's got audio. I have no idea. I've waited. I have sound on. So I'm just going to click this button. Is that what I'm doing?
Wait.
All right.
Well, you get to decide if you want to click the button.
Subject suddenly moved in another direction. Okay. It's like a story. Is this a story?
No, it's figuring out what you're doing.
Oh.
No, really?
Subject just
Unusual behavior.
Okay. All right. Oh, there's achievements, huh?
Yes.
You visited the click button, you clicked the button, you moved up, you moved down. All right, I can do these things.
Whoopsie. Oh, for fuck's sake.
I didn't know you never said that to me.
All right, so now I'm going to click the button.
Mm-hmm.
I have to do this. All right, so I feel like I've gotten most of... No, I haven't. All right, here we go. Buttons clicked. Subject logged in at...
Looking at subject's time zone, he probably should be at work.
Yeah, I should be.
Subject's cursor speed is pretty average.
Ouch.
But hey, is there anything more interesting than an ordinary person? Subject's cursor is mostly on the bottom right part of the screen. Sweet.
So I get achievements for being there for a minute?
Moving around a lot now.
Click
Curious
the button,
and energetic.
like
Interesting.
a couple times really quick.
How about like a whole bunch of times?
A triple click. Genius. Work harder.
In particular, this is exploiting some of the information given away by JavaScript. And
this is
you
a
probably never realize when you go to a website that the website's sitting in the background being like, oh, you spend most of your time in the bottom right corner of the screen. Maybe I should put the ads there. Or, it's like, oh.
5 times within 1 second. I did it more than that. 6 times within 1 second. So it's like watching everything I do. So this is really a demonstration.
Been around
and
for quite
narrating
some time now. Subject seems to like me. Well, go on then.
That's kind of funny. Is there a way to highlight this with the keyboard so I can just slam this thing like a monkey? Nope. See, what else you got now? What else you got? Why is this actually so much fun?
I don't know.
I don't understand. This is unusually fun. You could find that at click, or just use the link in the show
Cody
notes.
Dragon, no, that's not that.
That's pretty funny. So were you messing around with that before the show?
A little bit, yeah, when somebody sent it to me. But, that's actually stuff some websites do. Like if you have Google Analytics on, say, jb.com, you can actually go see a heat map of where people's mouse sits while they're looking at the
Nothing
page.
seems to trigger anything.
And like in the case of Scale Engine, we might be interested in, how long does it take before people click the get a free demo button and stuff like that.
Yes.
But
sort of creepy, Alan.
Looking at it will make you realize just how much the website is learning about you while you're reading the website.
Super creepy. And now you can kind of understand why those new CAPTCHAs, how they kind of work too. Like the ones that just sort of automatically sense if you're a robot or not. You don't actually have to, you kind of get an idea.
Yeah. If you are actually moving the cursor around versus just jumping from point A to point B and so on, then it's like,
If you'd like to get a story in our roundup, techsnap.reddit.com is a great way to do it. Don't forget you can send in your questions using the contact page, and you can watch us live over at jblive.tv with showtimes at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar, which you can convert to your local time zone right there on the page. Anything else we should cover, Mr. Jude, before we run?
No, that's about it.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.